Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts. Well, this episode is part 2 of our discussion into the biblical manuscripts purchased by Martin Bodmer in the 1950s. In part 1, we discuss Bodmer's life, his passion for collecting a library of world literature, and his dream that was realized in the construction of the Martin Bodmer Library and Museum, now in Cologne, Switzerland. His collection contains thousands of manuscripts from around the world, mostly non-biblical texts, but in this episode, we discuss 3 important New Testament manuscripts that are found in his collection. Among the manuscripts Bodmer purchased is a near complete copy of the Gospel of John. It is one of the oldest, well-preserved New Testament manuscripts known to exist. Another manuscript in the collection is the Papyri Codex, containing most of the text of the Gospel of Luke and the first 15 chapters of the Gospel of John. It is a candidate for the earliest manuscript of Luke we possess. The third manuscript that we will discuss is a codex that contains Jude, 1st and 2nd Peter. It is our earliest manuscripts of these texts. Bodmer donated the portion containing the letters of Peter, which were known as Bodmer Papyrus 8, to the Vatican in 1969. And that's significant because, Bodmer was a Protestant. We will cover these 4 areas dealing with Bodmer's biblical collection. Number 1, provenance. Number 2, extent of the collection. Number 3, dating the manuscripts. And 4, significance for biblical studies. So first, provenance. What do we mean by provenance? Well, provenance is the complete and verifiable history of custody of an archaeological object from the moment it's discovered in its physical context, and including its history of ownership. And as you will see, provenance is not always easy to determine. Unfortunately, we know little about the exact location of the Bodmer papyri find. They're clearly from somewhere in Egypt, but where? The story is hard to track down, as different locations from various persons have been given over time. At the beginning, it was thought that these manuscripts originated from ancient Panopolis, modern-day Akhmim. In our last episode, we recounted the story of Miss Odile Bongard, his Martin Bodmer's longtime personal friend, collaborator, and secretary, who purchased these manuscripts on his behalf. Her account seemed straightforward enough. She pointed to the area near Asyut, modern-day Lycopolis. But then we noted that Professor William White's account of a conversation he had with Miss Bongard, in which he says she told him a different story. Her first account places the find near Asyut, but in Dr. White's recollection, she mentioned Dishna in Upper Egypt. Currently, some scholars, Brent Nongbre included, who has made a concerted effort to study its provenance, prefer to identify the region around Dishna as the original location, and we accept that tentatively as the most probable. And for this reason, Bodmer's collection of biblical texts is now called the Dishna Papers. Now, what about the extent of the find? Exactly what were the contents? What documents made up this discovery? There is general agreement of a central core of manuscript that Bodmer purchased in the 1950s. Nongbre's conclusion is that the Bodmer papyri consists of 22 codices, and he lists these in his book, God's Library. They are mostly Greek and Coptic, with a few in Latin. Most are papyrus manuscripts, with a few parchment. The manuscripts represent texts from the Hebrew Bible, from the New Testament, from Menander, who is an ancient Greek dramatist, from Cicero, Thucydides, Melito, a few from the Septuagint, letters of Pachomius, and other texts. Again, refer to Nongbre's book, God's Library, for the complete list. But let's move on to look at those three manuscripts that we've selected as especially noteworthy. The first of these three would surely include Papyrus Bodmer II, also known as P66 in the Gregory Allan scheme of numbering papyri. It is in codex or book form, not a scroll. It's a near complete copy of the Gospel of John and holds the distinction of being perhaps the second or third oldest well-preserved manuscript of the New Testament. Now, please note that some portions are missing and fragmented, especially after chapter 14. And at the time of its discovery, most biblical papyri were fragmentary, so it was welcome to finally have one so intact as P66. Its first 26 leaves were basically fully intact, including the stitching of the binding. In the 1950s, the early 1950s, there were 65 fragmentary papyrus texts containing part of one or more of New Testament books. Bodmer Papyri II comes in at number 66, hence P66 or Papyrus 66. As of 2021, the count was up to P141. Now, P66 is a 5.5 inch by a little over 6-inch codex in square format. The text is written in single column with an average of 15 to 25 lines of Greek text. There are 75 folia or leaves intact with numerous other fragments. The manuscript has been digitized, and images that we're showing can be found online both at the Bodmer Foundation website and the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, and links for both of these images are found in the description. P66 has been dated variously from the 2nd century to the 4th century, based on paleography or handwriting style. Some textual critics see several scribes at work in the manuscript, the original scribe, and 2 correctors. The text exhibits standard nomina sacra, or those abbreviations in Greek with a line over the top that indicate sacred names such as God, Jesus, and Christ, and we've covered a few of these in our last episode. P66 also contains special nomina sacra for the words cross, crucify, and crucified. This is known as a starogram from the Greek word staros, meaning cross. The 2 Greek letters tau and rho were combined to visually represent the symbol of Jesus on a cross, like a T shape. And here is an example in P66. According to Larry Hurtado's study, he identifies 10 examples of the starogram in P66. The starogram also is featured in other manuscripts such as P75, which we'll cover shortly. And here is the corresponding English text with the starogram substituted where it would appear in the original Greek manuscript of John 19, verses 15 through 20. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to be crucified. Verse 18, "There they crucified him with 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle." Verse 19, "Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross." So you can see here how the starogram substitutes for the word cross, crucified, crucifixion. This tiny symbol, embedded within the Greek text of ancient and fragmentary documents, lets us share the reverence and respect that early Christians had for the death of Christ. In the starogram, we not only see the first depiction of Christ on the cross, but the beginning of Christian art and iconography. You can see a complete Greek transcription of P66 in Volume 1 of the book, The Text of the Earliest Greek New Testament Manuscripts by Philip Comfort and David Barrett. See link in the description. In general, the Greek text of P66 is representative of the Alexandrian text type. Now, what do we mean by Alexandrian text type? Well, without going too deep into the woods, let's do a brief definition of text types. Groups of manuscripts that share common readings and characteristics suggest a common shared textual history. Now, I know that the idea of text types is basically becoming outdated among some New Testament scholars and textual critics, but it's still used in the literature, and you'll still find references to it. So I'll include the idea of text types here. There are over 5,800 or so New Testament manuscripts, a few whole or basically whole, many fragmentary, but they're classified by 4 groups into text types. Beside the Alexandrian, the other 3 would be the Western, Caesarean, and Byzantine. The Alexandrian text type is favored by many textual critics, and many of its readings are found in your modern Bible translations. Compared to the other text types, Alexandrian readings tend to be abrupt, use fewer words, and have readings that might be considered difficult. Later scribes tended to polish scripture and improve its literary style. We'll not go into more detail on text types in this episode, but I just wanted you to be aware that P66 is still classified by some as an Alexandrian text type, and the takeaway is, in many cases, its readings tend to be shorter. This we will see as we explore some examples from P66 that differ from Textus Receptus, or the manuscript tradition is the basis for the King James Version. For example, in John chapter 1, verse 18, in P66, the text reads, "the only begotten God," rather than "the only begotten Son" that you will see in the King James Version. This reflects a very high Christology in the early church. In John chapter 5, verse 4, in the New King James Version, which recounts the story of the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda, the text reads, "For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had." This passage is not found in P66. Many textual critics consider it to be a later addition, and this is why you will not find it in the modern translations. Of course, the famous John chapter 7, verses 53 through chapter 8, verses 11. Textual critics and New Testament scholars refer to this section of text as the Pericope Adulterae, more commonly known as the story of the woman caught in adultery, perhaps better known as the story of the judgmental Pharisees. Nonetheless, P66 does not contain this story. It is not alone in its absence. P75, Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus also like the passage. Now, there are some scholars who believe the passage should be included in our New Testament. The discussion is beyond our scope in this episode, but I will link to the controversy in the description box. Now, at this point, I do feel compelled to comment on the use of artificial intelligence being used as a tool for biblical research. As a test, I asked ChatGPT to provide some examples where P66 does not contain verses found in the Textus Receptus. One of the examples it returned is patently false. And here's a screenshot where it reported that in John chapter 4, verse 9, P66 omits the phrase, "For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Well, P66 does in fact have the phrase, and here it is in the Greek text of P66. So, do not blindly take answers from AI tools without verifying their validity for yourself. There are many popular and scholarly articles written about P66, and I've linked to some in the description box for your further search. It might interest you to know that Gordon Fee wrote his 1966 PhD dissertation on the subject, "The Significance of Papyrus Bodmer II and Papyrus Bodmer 1415 for Methodology in New Testament Textual Criticism." This dissertation was submitted to the University of Southern California Graduate School, and was one of its signatures from the dissertation committee was none other than Eldon J. Epp, renowned New Testament scholar, who signed off on the dissertation. Well, let's move on to the second significant Bodmer papyrus, that is Bodmers 7 and 8. It is known as P72 in the Gregory Allan scheme and contains 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude. P72 is the earliest copy of these 3 letters, being variously dated from the 3rd to the 4th century. P72 is more than just a biblical manuscript. It's a miscellaneous Christian codex. It combines canonical and non-canonical texts. It's a papyrus manuscript with 85 leaves, and the Greek codex measures approximately 5.5 by 6 inches, again in kind of a squarish format. The manuscript also contains the usual nomina sacra for Messiah, Jesus, God, Lord, Spirit, Father, and other words. The scribal quality is uneven, suggesting a non-professional scribe or multiple hands. Unlike the more polished P75, which we'll come to next, which is tall, narrow, carefully constructed, P72's irregular size and spacing indicate a less formal production. There are frequent corrections in the text, which suggests it was not produced in a formal scriptorium, but perhaps by a monk or early Christian scribe copying for personal or community use. P72 is also considered a representative of the Alexandrian text type. You can view images of P72 online, again at both the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts website and the Vatican digital website. Links provided below. Martin Bodmer donated the letters of Peter, that would be P. Bodmer 8, to the Vatican in 1969. Again, a gift from a dedicated Protestant to the Catholic Church. Let's look at just one reading from P72 that differs from the King James Version or the Textus Receptus. In the King James Version, Jude 5 reads, "Though you already know all this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt." P72, however, reads that it was God Christ who delivered his people. It's very interesting in that the two words God Christ in the text are in nomina sacra form, or abbreviated. Theo Christus. Lastly, let's look at P75, also known as P. Bodmer 14 and 15. In 2007, P75 was acquired from the Bodmer Library by American philanthropist Frank Hanna. He donated it to the Vatican Library and is now known by the name Hanna Papyrus I. Papyrus 75, Hanna Papyrus I, is an early Greek New Testament manuscript in codex form containing the Greek text from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 3, verse 18 through 24, verse 53, and containing also John chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 15, verse 8. It's been traditionally dated to the 3rd century, although Brent Nongbri's provided arguments to consider date ranges into the early 4th century. It is due to the traditional early dating that the manuscript has such a high evaluation, and the fact that its text so closely resembles that of the 4th century Codex Vaticanus. It's another text considered to be of the Alexandrian text type. P75 is the earliest known copy of the Gospel of Luke, and one of the earliest copies of the Gospel of John. It contains the earliest form of the Lord's Prayer. It originally contained about 144 pages, 102 of which have survived and 20 which are fragmented. You can view black and white images of P75 at the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts and color images at the Vatican Digital Library website. Its page size measures 5.5 inches wide by 10.5 inches tall, written in a single column per page, about 38 to 45 lines per column. The text is densely packed with minimal space between letters and no paragraph breaks. The script is carefully written in large upright letters known as majuscule, or previously we called them uncial. The handwriting is neat and professional, with fewer corrections than P66, suggesting a more trained scribe who copied it. The letters are evenly spaced, there's a consistent slant and a clear form. There are no ligatures or cursive elements. Each letter is written separately without word breaks. Remember, we call this style scriptio continua. It also contains nomina sacra for the words God, Jesus, Lord, Christ, and Spirit, and others. An unusual feature of this codex is that when the Gospel of Luke ends, the Gospel of John begins on the same page. Now let's consider a few of the readings from P75 or the Hannah Papyrus 1 compared to the Textus Receptus or King James and wrap up this episode. In Luke chapter 11, verse 4, the King James Version reads, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." P75 does not have the phrase, "but deliver us from evil." Next, I'm sure you recall the story of the rich man and Lazarus. We all know Lazarus' name, but do you know the name of the rich man? Well, P75 gives us his name, and in P75, the name is pronounced something like Nuas or Nuas. So now you know. In Luke chapter 23, verse 34, P75 does not have the words of Jesus from the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In John 5, verse 4, the New King James Version reads, "For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever stepped in it first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had." P75 does not have this text. In addition, the story of the woman caught in adultery, or the story of the judgmental Pharisees, some have argued it could have been present at the end of John in P75, but P75 doesn't have any material past John chapter 15, verse 8. In any event, the story of the judgmental Pharisees or the story of the woman caught in adultery is not in the text that we have in P75. Well, let's wrap up with the overall significance of the Bodmer Papyri for New Testament studies. The manuscripts are some of the earliest known witnesses to the text of the New Testament and give us insights into how early scribes worked, including their habit of correcting, expanding, or harmonizing texts. They offer scholars a window into early Christian scribal processes, provide valuable insights into textual variants, and significantly contribute to the modern critical edition of the Greek New Testament as represented in United Bible Society's version and the Nethel Alan edition. Their careful study continues to shape the field of textual criticism and deepen our understanding of how the New Testament has been preserved and passed down through the centuries. Well, we hope you have enjoyed part 2 of the series featuring Martin Bodmer and his collection of New Testament manuscripts. If you have, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We appreciate your suggestions and comments for our channel. We're doing our best to provide quality material with helpful links in the description box for your further study. I'm thinking perhaps one more episode will wrap up this series on manuscript hunters and collectors. This one, the next one, will feature someone that you will surely know if you keep up with this field. The initials are DW. Be well and stay tuned for the next episode of The League of Biblical Enthusiasts.